help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Please like the video and share your thoughts on the video. Your feedback helps make the contents better. Now let's get to the story.
I came home at lunch. My wife was in the pool with my son-in-law. I saw the lubricant bottle on the nightstand. Silently, I swapped the liquid for industrial glue and locked the door. An hour later, the firefighters couldn't stop laughing. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought 30 years of marriage could crumble in the span of a single lunch break. My name is Walter Bennett, and at 63 years old, I believed I had seen enough of life to predict its patterns. Tuesday mornings meant oatmeal and black coffee. Wednesday evenings brought Evelyn's book club. Thursdays were reserved for yard work and quiet dinners. Our life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, or so I thought. That Tuesday started like any other. Evelyn kissed my cheek goodbye as she left for her job at the insurance office, her perfume lingering in the kitchen long after her car disappeared down Maple Street. At 58, she still moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her place in the world. I envied that certainty. I had been retired for 2 years now, after spending 41 years as a postal supervisor. My pension of $2,500 a month, combined with Evelyn's salary of $3,950, kept us comfortable in our modest 2-story home. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention. That was how I preferred it. The morning dragged on with its usual mundane tasks. I watered Evelyn's rose garden, sorted through bills, and attempted to fix the squeaky hinge on the garage door. By 11:30, my stomach was growling, and I remembered the leftover meatloaf Evelyn had prepared the night before. A quick drive home for lunch seemed like the perfect break from my aimless retirement routine. I pulled into our driveway at exactly 12:15, noting that Evelyn's Honda was parked in its usual spot. Strange. She typically ate lunch at her desk, always complaining about having too much work to leave the office. Maybe she had come home sick. I used my key quietly, not wanting to wake her if she was resting. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. The living room was empty, but I could hear muffled voices coming from the direction of our backyard pool. Evelyn had been after me for months to use the pool more often. "We spend all that money maintaining it, Walter, and you never even get in," she would say. Perhaps she had decided to take her own advice and was enjoying a midday swim. I moved through the kitchen toward the sliding glass door that led to our patio, but something stopped me before I reached it. Through the window I could see 2 figures in the water. Evelyn was there just as I had expected. But she wasn't alone. David Stones, our son-in-law, was with her. At first, my mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Perhaps he had come to check on Evelyn. Perhaps there was some family emergency involving our daughter, Claire. But as I watched, frozen behind the kitchen curtains, the truth became unavoidably clear. They weren't just swimming. Evelyn's arms were wrapped around David's neck, her legs around his waist. They moved together in the water with an intimacy that made my chest tighten and my hands tremble. This wasn't casual. This wasn't innocent. This was deliberate, passionate, and devastating. I watched my wife of 30 years kiss the man who had married our only daughter 8 years ago. I watched her touch him the way she used to touch me back when we still touched at all. I watched David's hands explore her body with a familiarity that spoke of practice, of repetition, of time invested in learning what pleased her. My legs felt weak. I gripped the kitchen counter, the granite cold against my palm, and tried to make sense of what I was witnessing. How long had this been going on? How many times had they met like this while I puttered around the house, oblivious and trusting? The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just Evelyn's infidelity that wounded me. It was David's. This was the man who sat at our dinner table every Sunday, who called me Dad when he wanted to borrow tools, who had promised to love and honor our daughter. This was the man who shook my hand with the same hands that were now caressing my wife. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I needed to decide what to do with this terrible knowledge. Walking mechanically through our house, I found myself in our bedroom. Everything looked the same as it had that morning when I made the bed and straightened Evelyn's jewelry on the dresser. But now I saw it differently. I saw it as the stage for her deception. That's when I noticed the small bottle on Evelyn's nightstand. At first, I thought it was hand lotion, but as I picked it up, I realized what it was. Personal lubricant, the expensive kind that Evelyn had claimed we didn't need anymore, back when we still shared physical intimacy. She had prepared for this. She had planned for David to come here, to our bed, to our sacred space. The calculation of it made me nauseated. I stood there holding that bottle, and something inside me shifted. The hurt began to transform into something harder, colder. If Evelyn wanted to play games, if she wanted to treat our marriage as something disposable, then perhaps it was time she learned that actions have consequences. I walked to the garage where I kept my workshop supplies. Among the various bottles and containers, I found what I was looking for: industrial-strength adhesive. The kind used for permanent bonds. The kind that warned on the label about skin contact and the need for immediate medical attention if misused. Back in the bedroom, I carefully emptied the lubricant bottle and refilled it with the clear, viscous adhesive. The consistency was similar enough that it would pass casual inspection, but the effects would be dramatically different. I placed the bottle back exactly where I had found it, then quietly locked the bedroom door from the inside before slipping out through the bathroom that connected to the hallway. If they wanted privacy for their encounter, I would ensure they got more than they bargained for. I returned to the kitchen and sat at our breakfast table, the same table where Evelyn and I had shared coffee that morning, where she had kissed my cheek goodbye before heading off to work, or so I had thought. Through the window, I could see them still in the pool, still wrapped in their passionate embrace. Part of me wanted to storm outside and confront them immediately. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and leave forever. But a larger part of me wanted to see how this would play out, wanted to witness the consequences of their choices unfold naturally. I made myself a sandwich with the leftover meatloaf and waited. I knew it wouldn't be long before they moved their activities indoors, before they discovered my little modification to their plans. As I ate, I thought about the man I had been just an hour earlier. That Walter Bennett had been naive, trusting, perhaps willfully blind to the cracks in his marriage. But that man was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the people you love most are the ones most capable of destroying you. The irony wasn't lost on me that Evelyn and David thought they were the ones in control, that they were the ones with secrets and power. They had no idea that I had secrets of my own. Secrets that would soon change everything they thought they knew about our family dynamics. But for now I would wait. I would be patient. And I would let them discover, in the most uncomfortable way possible, that betrayal always comes with a price. The clock on the microwave read 12:52. It wouldn't be much longer now. Exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes after I had made my discovery, the screaming started. It began as muffled shouts from upstairs, then escalated into genuine panic. Evelyn's voice high and desperate, calling for help. David's deeper tone, cursing in a way that would have made our daughter Claire blush. The sound of frantic movement, furniture scraping against the floor. Then Evelyn's voice again, this time pleading, "Call 911. Call 911. I finished the last bite of my sandwich and calmly walked to the phone. When the operator answered, I let genuine concern color my voice. "I need an ambulance at 1527 Maple Street. I think there's been some kind of accident. My wife is screaming upstairs." Within 12 minutes, our quiet suburban street was transformed into a circus. A fire truck, an ambulance, and 2 police cars lined the curb. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Whitfield from next door clutched her bathrobe and craned her neck to get a better view. I met the paramedics at the front door, playing the role of the confused, worried husband. "I just got home from running errands," I explained, wringing my hands appropriately. I heard shouting from upstairs. "The bedroom door is locked and they're not responding to my calls." The fire department made quick work of our bedroom door. What they found inside would become neighborhood legend within the week. Evelyn and David were indeed stuck together, courtesy of the industrial adhesive I had substituted for their intended lubricant. They had managed to separate themselves from each other partially, but not without leaving David with several square inches of skin adhered to various parts of Evelyn's anatomy and vice versa. The look of mortification on both their faces almost made the entire ordeal worthwhile. "How did this happen?" asked Captain Alvarez, the fire department's ranking officer, as his team worked to free the trapped couple using specialized solvents. Evelyn, wrapped in a sheet and trying to maintain some dignity, shot me a look of pure venom. "The bottle," she managed through gritted teeth. "Someone must have switched the contents." "Switched?" I asked, allowing confusion to cloud my features. "Who would do such a thing? And why would someone come into our house to tamper with personal items?" David, red-faced and focused on the paramedic treating his adhesive burns, muttered something about accidents and bad manufacturing. The paramedics exchanged glances. This wasn't the first time they had been called to unusual adhesive emergencies, but it was clearly one they would remember. "We're going to need to transport both of you to General Hospital," announced the lead paramedic, a competent-looking woman in her 40s. "Those chemical burns need proper treatment, and we need to make sure there's no permanent damage." As Evelyn was helped onto a stretcher, still partially covered by a sheet, she grabbed my arm. Her fingernails dug into my skin, and her voice was barely a whisper. "We need to talk." I nodded solemnly, the picture of a concerned husband. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll follow the ambulance to the hospital." But I didn't follow the ambulance. Instead, I waited until the street cleared of emergency vehicles and curious neighbors before I went back inside my house. I needed time to think, to plan my next moves, and to savor the small victory I had just achieved. The bedroom was a disaster. Chemical solvents had stained the carpet, the bed sheets were ruined, and the entire room would need to be aired out for hours. But it was fitting. Somehow, the scene of Evelyn's betrayal had been properly desecrated. I was sitting in my living room, considering my options, when Claire's car pulled into the driveway. My daughter burst through the front door without knocking, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Dad, what the hell happened here?" she demanded, still wearing her work scrubs from the veterinary clinic where she worked as a technician. "David called me from the hospital. He said there was some kind of accident with Mom, but he wouldn't explain what kind of accident requires chemical burn treatment." I studied my daughter carefully. Claire had always been closer to her mother than to me, and she had developed an unfortunate tendency to side with Evelyn in any family dispute. But she was also my only child, and despite everything, I loved her. "Your mother and David were injured in what appears to be an industrial adhesive accident," I said carefully. "I'm not sure how it happened. I came home from running errands and found them in distress." Claire stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "David was here in the middle of the day." "Why?" "I assumed he had come to check on your mother. Perhaps she had called him because she wasn't feeling well." "Dad." Claire sat down across from me, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining medical procedures to difficult pet owners. "David doesn't just come by during the day to check on Mom. He was at work. He left work to come here. And now they're both at the hospital with adhesive burns." What really happened? The moment had arrived sooner than I expected, but I was prepared for it. "Claire, I think you need to ask your husband and your mother that question." "What's that supposed to mean?" I reached for the remote and muted the television, creating a silence that filled the room like a heavy blanket. "It means that when I came home today, I discovered some things that have made me question everything I thought I knew about our family." Claire's face went pale. "Dad, please don't tell me you think what I think you're thinking." "What do you think I'm thinking?" "You think Mom and David were together? Like together?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch until Claire's discomfort was visible in every line of her body. "Your mother and David were found in a compromising position in our bedroom," I said finally. "The rest, I think, speaks for itself." Claire shot to her feet, her hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible. Mom would never do that. David would never do that. You're being paranoid and jealous and ridiculous." "Am I?" "Yes. And even if something weird happened, even if there was some misunderstanding, you don't just let people get hurt with industrial adhesive. If you switched that lubricant, if you did this on purpose, that's assault." I raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an accusation, Claire. Are you suggesting I deliberately harmed your mother and husband?" "I don't know what I'm suggesting. I just know that none of this makes sense." The front door opened again and Evelyn walked in, moving carefully and wearing a hospital gown under David's jacket. Her face was drawn with pain and humiliation, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. David followed behind her, walking with an obvious limp and sporting several large bandages on his arms and torso. He looked like he had been in a fight and lost badly. "Mom?" Claire rushed to Evelyn's side. "Are you okay? What happened?" Evelyn finally looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Not just embarrassment or anger, but genuine fear of what I might say next. "Your father," Evelyn said carefully, "seems to believe that David and I were engaged in inappropriate behavior." "Were you?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. David shifted uncomfortably, favoring his injured leg. Claire looked back and forth between her mother and husband, searching their faces for the truth she didn't want to find. "Robert," Evelyn said, using my old name out of habit, her voice taking on a tone I recognized from 30 years of marriage. The tone she used when she was about to attempt to manage me. "You're upset. You're confused. But making wild accusations won't help anyone." "I'm not making accusations," I replied calmly. "I'm asking questions. Simple, direct questions that deserve simple, direct answers." David finally spoke, his voice hoarse from the morning's ordeal. "Look, Dad, I know how this looks." "Don't call me Dad," I interrupted, and the sharpness in my voice surprised even me. "Whatever you are to this family, David, you lost the right to call me Dad today." Claire gasped. "You can't just decide that. David is my husband. He's part of this family." I turned to look at my daughter, this young woman who had once sat on my lap and called me the best daddy in the world, who had run to me when she was frightened and trusted me to fix everything that was broken in her small world. "Claire," I said gently, "family members don't betray each other the way your husband and mother have betrayed you and me." The words hit her like physical blows. I could see her trying to process what I was really saying, trying to reconcile the people she trusted most with the accusations I was making. "This is insane," she whispered. "This whole day is insane." But I could see doubt creeping into her expression. She was looking at David differently now, noting how he wouldn't meet her eyes, how he stood closer to Evelyn than to his own wife. The three of them stood in my living room like defendants awaiting sentencing. And for the first time since that terrible lunch break, I felt like I was in control of something. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly suspect, was that today's adhesive incident was just the beginning. 3 days after the hospital incident, I discovered that my family's betrayal ran deeper than adultery. I was sitting in my home office, a small room off the kitchen where I paid bills and managed our modest finances, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a woman in a business suit carrying a leather briefcase. Her car, a sleek black sedan, suggested she wasn't selling encyclopedias. "Mr. Bennett?" she asked when I opened the door. "My name is Diana Foster. I'm from Sunrise Senior Living Solutions. I believe your family has been in contact with us." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Sunrise Senior Living was the most expensive assisted living facility in our county, the kind of place families sent elderly relatives when they wanted them comfortable but out of the way. "I think there's been a mistake," I said carefully. "I haven't contacted any senior living facilities." Diana consulted her tablet, frowning. "According to our records, your daughter, Claire Bennett Stones, initiated contact with us 2 weeks ago. She indicated that you were experiencing some cognitive decline and that the family was exploring residential care options." 2 weeks ago. Before the pool incident. Before I had discovered Evelyn's affair. They had been planning to warehouse me even before their secret was exposed. "I see," I managed, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "And what exactly did my daughter tell you about my condition?" Diana looked uncomfortable but continued reading from her tablet. "She mentioned that you've been having memory issues, confusion about finances, and some aggressive episodes. She was particularly concerned about your ability to continue living independently." Aggressive episodes, memory issues, financial confusion. They had built an entire narrative around my unfitness, creating a foundation for removing me from my own life. May I ask who else has been involved in these discussions? I asked. Well, your wife, Evelyn Bennett, also attended our facility tour last week. She seemed very concerned about your welfare and asked detailed questions about our memory care unit. Evelyn had toured the facility. While I was puttering around the house, believing I was living a quiet retirement with a faithful wife, she was shopping for places to stash me so she could continue her affair with my son-in-law. And the financial arrangements? I pressed. Diana shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Bennett indicated that you have a modest pension and some savings, but that the family would need to supplement the costs. Our monthly rate is $4,700, so additional family support would be necessary. $4,700 a month, nearly twice my pension. They plan to drain our savings to pay for my imprisonment while Evelyn and David enjoyed their newfound freedom. I appreciate you coming by, I said, forcing a smile. But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not interested in assisted living at this time. Of course, Mr. Bennett, these decisions are never easy. But I should mention that your daughter seemed quite determined. She asked about our procedures for residents who might be resistant to the transition. Resistant to the transition. They had even planned for my objections. After Diana left, I sat in my office staring at the financial documents spread across my desk, bank statements, investment records, pension paperwork, all the mundane evidence of a life lived responsibly. But none of it told the real story of my financial situation. The real story was locked in a safety deposit box across town, in documents I had never shared with Evelyn or Claire. Documents that would change everything they thought they knew about Walter Bennett. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed David's number. Hello, David, I answered, my voice neutral. Dad, Walter, David corrected himself quickly. Look, I think we need to clear the air about what happened yesterday. Do we? Claire is really upset. She's not sleeping. She's barely eating. This whole misunderstanding is tearing her apart. Misunderstanding? I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? David's voice took on a pleading tone. Look, I know how it looked. Evelyn called me because she was having some kind of panic attack. She asked me to come over because she didn't want to worry you. When I got here, she was already in the pool trying to calm down. I got in to help her and things just got confused. It was a remarkably creative story, I had to admit. Panic attacks, confusion, misunderstandings. David had clearly spent the past few days crafting a narrative that cast him and Evelyn as innocent victims of circumstance. And the bedroom? I asked. How did you both end up there if Evelyn was having a panic attack? A long pause. She said she needed to lie down. I was just helping her upstairs when the accident happened. The accident? Yes. Obviously, someone tampered with that bottle, but we don't know who or why. Maybe it was some kind of prank gone wrong, or maybe there was a manufacturing defect. I almost admired his persistence. Even with chemical burns on his body and his marriage hanging by a thread, David was still trying to spin the story in his favor. David, I said quietly, did you know that Claire contacted an assisted living facility about me? Another long pause, this one more telling than any confession. What? Sunrise Senior Living. Claire told them I was having cognitive problems and needed residential care. Evelyn even toured the facility. I don't know anything about that. But his voice had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded like panic. The representative just left my house, I continued. She had quite detailed notes about my supposed mental decline. $4,700 a month, David. That's what it costs to warehouse an inconvenient husband and father. Robert, if Claire called them, she was probably just worried about you. After your mother died last year, and with your retirement, maybe she thought. My mother died 12 years ago, David. Not last year. Silence. If you're going to lie to me, I said calmly, you should at least keep your facts straight. I could hear David's breathing on the other end of the line, quick and shallow. He was realizing that his carefully constructed story was falling apart. Look, he said finally, maybe there have been some misunderstandings on all sides. Maybe we should all sit down and talk this through like adults. I think that's an excellent idea. Why don't you and Evelyn and Claire come over tonight? 7 o'clock. We'll have a family meeting. Okay. Yes, that's good. We can work this out. Bring the paperwork. What paperwork? From Sunrise Senior Living. I'm sure you've seen it, since you and Evelyn and Claire have been planning my future behind my back. Bring all of it. I hung up before he could respond. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, and I had preparations to make. I drove across town to First National Bank, where I had maintained a safety deposit box for the past 6 years. The contents of that box were going to reshape my family's understanding of power and control. Inside were documents that told a very different story about Walter Bennett's financial situation: stock certificates, property deeds, investment accounts, all stemming from an inheritance I had received after my Uncle Bernard's death in 2018. Bernard had been my mother's oldest brother, a bachelor who had spent his life quietly accumulating wealth through careful investments and frugal living. When he died at the age of 89, he left his entire estate to me, his only surviving nephew. $4,500,000. I had told no one about the inheritance, not even Evelyn. Something had held me back from sharing the news, some instinct for self-preservation that I hadn't fully understood at the time. Now I was grateful for that instinct. The money had been invested conservatively, generating enough income to more than triple my apparent financial resources, but I had continued to live on my pension, maintaining the fiction that we were a middle-class couple with modest means. Why had I kept it secret? Perhaps because I had sensed even then that Evelyn's love had conditions. Perhaps because I wanted to know that if people claimed to love me, they loved Walter Bennett, the retired postal worker, not Walter Bennett, the millionaire. Now I knew how prescient that decision had been. I returned home with copies of the most important documents and spent the afternoon organizing them into neat folders. By 6:30, I was ready for the family meeting that would change everything. Evelyn arrived first, walking carefully and wearing loose clothing that wouldn't irritate her remaining bandages. She looked older than her 58 years, worn down by pain, stress, and the effort of maintaining her lies. "Walter," she said, settling gingerly into her favorite chair. "I'm glad we're going to talk about this rationally." "Are we going to talk rationally, Evelyn? Are you going to tell me the truth about your relationship with David?" Her lips tightened. "I've told you the truth. There is no relationship beyond family." Claire and David arrived together, both looking like they were attending a funeral. Claire's eyes were red from crying, and David moved like a man walking to his execution. "Dad," Claire began as soon as she sat down, "I know you're upset about everything, but we need to talk about what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated. "Let's start with what's best for me, Claire. Do you think it's best for me to be placed in an assisted living facility against my will?" Claire's face flushed. "How did you? I was just exploring options. You're getting older, and after what happened the other day, I'm worried about your judgment." "My judgment?" "Dad, if you really did switch that lubricant with industrial adhesive, that's not normal behavior. That's the kind of thing that makes me worry about your mental state." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised from infancy, who had learned to walk holding my hands and had run to me with every scraped knee and broken heart. She was sitting in my living room in the house I had provided for her entire childhood, telling me that my mental state was questionable. "Claire," I said quietly, "before we discuss my mental state, perhaps we should discuss your husband's relationship with your mother." "There is no relationship." Claire exploded, her composure finally cracking. "Why can't you get that through your head? David loves me. Mom loves you. This whole thing is just a horrible misunderstanding, and you're making it worse by refusing to see reason." "Then explain to me," I said, reaching for one of the folders I had prepared, "why David's cell phone records show 17 calls to your mother's personal number in the past month, calls made during work hours when he should have been at the construction site." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's face went white. David stared at the floor. Evelyn's hands trembled as she clutched the arms of her chair. "How did you get David's phone records?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The same way I got the records showing that you called in sick 12 times in the past 3 months, always on days when David's work schedule showed him off-site." I opened the folder and spread the papers across the coffee table. The same way I found out about your joint visits to Sunrise Senior Living. Claire stared at the documents, her world crumbling before her eyes. This can't be true. David, tell him this isn't true. Tell me this isn't true, she screamed. But David couldn't tell her that because we all knew it was true. The evidence was spread across my coffee table like a road map of betrayal, and there was no explaining it away. What they still didn't know was that this was only the beginning of their education about the man they had so carelessly underestimated. Claire's scream still echoed in the room when I reached for the second folder. Before anyone says another word, I announced, my voice cutting through the chaos of accusations and denials, there's something you all need to understand about your situation. Evelyn wiped her eyes with a tissue, trying to regain some composure. Walter, please, let's not make this worse than it already is. Worse? I laughed, and the sound was harsh even to my own ears. Evelyn, you and David have been carrying on an affair for months, possibly longer. You've conspired to have me declared mentally incompetent and removed from my own home. You've involved our daughter in a plan to warehouse me in an expensive facility while you drain our savings to pay for your freedom. How exactly could this get worse? David finally found his voice. Look, Walter, maybe we can work something out. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone, I repeated. Like the solution you and Evelyn found for your mutual attraction. Like the solution Claire found for her inconvenient father. Claire was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. I didn't know, she gasped. I swear to God, Dad, I didn't know about Mom and David. I was just trying to do what I thought was best for you. I studied my daughter's face, looking for traces of the little girl who used to believe I could fix anything. Scared of what, Claire? Scared that you were losing your mind. Scared that you might hurt someone, or yourself. Scared that we were going to lose you to dementia or something worse. And so, your solution was to lock me away? Not lock you away, she protested. The place I looked at is really nice. They have activities and medical care and $4,700 a month, I interrupted. Did you think about how we were going to afford that on my pension of $2,200? Claire looked confused. Mom said there were savings. She said you had some investments that could cover the difference. I turned to Evelyn. What investments did you tell her about? Evelyn's face had gone ashen. She knew she was trapped, caught in a web of lies that was becoming more complex by the minute. There's the money from when we refinanced the house and your retirement account. The refinance gave us $8,000, Evelyn. My 401k has $37,000 in it. Together, that might cover 8 months at Sunrise Senior Living. What were you planning to do after that money ran out? Silence. Were you planning to sell the house? I pressed. More silence. Of course you were. Sell the house, use the proceeds to pay for my care, and then what? Where were you planning to live, Evelyn? David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and suddenly I understood. David was planning to leave Claire, I said, the pieces falling into place. That's part of this, isn't it? You two were going to run away together once I was safely tucked away and Claire was dealing with the fallout. Claire's head snapped up. That's not true. David loves me. David would never leave me. But she was looking at her husband as she said it, searching his face for confirmation that didn't come. David. Claire's voice was small now, childlike. Tell him that's not true. David stared at his hands. Claire, this is all very complicated. Complicated? Claire's voice rose to a near shriek. Either you love me and want to stay married to me or you don't. How is that complicated? Because your mother and I, David started, then stopped. Because your mother and David what? I asked, leaning forward in my chair. Go ahead, David. Tell Claire what you and Evelyn have been planning. David looked up at me and I saw something unexpected in his eyes. Relief. As if he was grateful that someone else was finally going to tell the truth. He couldn't bring himself to speak. We love each other, Evelyn said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. David and I love each other. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner of our lives. Claire made a sound I had never heard before, a keening wail that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. She turned to David, her face contorted with anguish. How long? David couldn't meet her eyes. David, how long? She screamed. 14 months, Evelyn answered for him. It started 14 months ago. 14 months. While Claire was planning their future, David was planning his escape. While I was enjoying what I thought was a peaceful retirement, my wife was building a new life with my son-in-law. 14 months, Claire repeated, her voice hollow. Our anniversary was last month. You wished me happy anniversary. You gave me flowers and told me you loved me. I do love you, David said miserably. But I love your mother too. You don't get to love us both, Claire shouted. You can't have us both. We know that, Evelyn said quietly. That's why we needed to make some changes. Changes? What a sterile word for the destruction of our family. I watched this exchange with a strange sense of detachment, as if I were viewing a play rather than living through the collapse of my own life. But I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I had power they didn't know about, and it was time to use it. You want to know what's really interesting about this situation? I asked, reaching for the second folder. It's not just that you've all betrayed me. It's that you've all underestimated me. I opened the folder and spread its contents across the coffee table, next to the phone records and assisted living brochures, bank statements, investment records, property deeds, all bearing my name and numbers that made Evelyn gasp audibly. What is this? She whispered, staring at a statement that showed an account balance of $1,700,000. This is what you don't know about your husband, I said calmly. This is what David doesn't know about his father-in-law. This is what Claire doesn't know about the man she was planning to lock away in an assisted living facility. David leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. Walter, what are these documents? These documents represent my inheritance from Uncle Bernard, $4,500,000 received 6 years ago and carefully invested ever since. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Claire's sobbing stopped as she tried to process what I had just revealed. $4 million? Evelyn's voice was barely audible. $4,500,000, I corrected. Plus investment growth over 6 years. My current net worth is approximately $6,200,000. Claire stared at me as if I had just announced I was from another planet. Dad, that's not possible. We live in this little house. You drive a 12-year-old Honda. You clip coupons. I live modestly by choice, Claire. I wanted to see what kind of people you all were when you thought I had nothing to offer but my pension and my love. The impact of this revelation was immediate and devastating. I could see the calculations running behind their eyes, the realization of what they had thrown away, what they had risked, what they had lost. Evelyn's face had gone from ashen to gray. 6 years. You've known about this money for 6 years and you never told me. Why? Why would I tell you, Evelyn? So you could spend it on spa treatments and expensive vacations? So you could quit your job and develop even more elaborate ways to betray me? That money belongs to both of us, she said, her voice gaining strength as anger replaced shock. We're married. Community property. I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Actually, Evelyn, inheritance received by one spouse during marriage is considered separate property in this state, provided it's kept in separate accounts and not commingled with marital assets. David was staring at the documents, his mouth slightly open. You're a millionaire. Yes. And you let us think you were just some poor retirees. Yes. And now you're telling us because I want you to understand what you've lost, Evelyn. You threw away a marriage to a man worth over $6 million so you could carry on an affair with a construction worker who makes $43,000 a year. David flinched as if I had slapped him. Claire, you conspired to have your millionaire father declared incompetent and locked away, believing you were dealing with a confused old man with limited resources. Claire was shaking her head slowly, as if she could deny the reality of what was happening. And David, I continued, you destroyed your marriage to a woman who genuinely loved you, betrayed the trust of a man who welcomed you as a son, and threw away any chance of being included in a family fortune that could have changed your life forever. The three of them sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of their mistakes. The really tragic part, I added, is that if you had simply been honest with me about your feelings, if you had come to me and said that David and Evelyn had fallen in love and wanted to be together, I might have been willing to discuss a reasonable settlement. I might have been willing to help Claire through her divorce to ensure that everyone landed on their feet. Evelyn's eyes widened. You would have. I might have. We'll never know now, will we? Because instead of honesty, you chose deception. Instead of respect, you chose betrayal. Instead of treating me like a human being with feelings and dignity, you treated me like an obstacle to be removed. I gathered the documents back into their folders, my movements deliberate and calm. So, here's what's going to happen now, I continued. Evelyn, you're going to file for divorce and you're going to accept whatever settlement my attorneys decide is fair. David, you're going to move out of my daughter's house and find somewhere else to live. And Claire. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's stubborn streak, who had been willing to sacrifice my freedom for her own peace of mind. Claire, you're going to have to decide whether you want to try to repair our relationship, or whether you want to side with the people who betrayed both of us. Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about Mom and David. I was just trying to do what I thought was best for you. Were you, Claire? Or were you trying to do what was easiest for you? She didn't answer because we both knew the truth. I stood up, my decision made. I think that's enough family time for one evening. Evelyn, I'll expect you to be out of the house by the end of the week. David, don't come back here again. Claire. Well, Claire, you know where to find me if you decide you want to apologize properly. As they filed out of my house, bought with my money, maintained with my labor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own life. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, I would start making the changes that would ensure none of them could ever manipulate me again. The next morning, I called the finest divorce attorney in the state. Victoria Shaw had a reputation for being ruthless, meticulous, and expensive. Her hourly rate of $650 would have been impossible on my pension, but it was pocket change against my real net worth. When I explained my situation during our initial consultation, her eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of a shark scenting blood. Mr. Bennett, she said, reviewing the documents I had brought, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of marital misconduct I've seen in 20 years of practice. Your wife committed adultery, conspired to have you declared incompetent, and attempted to gain control of assets she believed you possessed. The fact that she was unaware of your actual financial situation only strengthens our position. What can we expect in terms of settlement? I asked. Victoria smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. In this state, adultery is grounds for fault-based divorce. Given the evidence you've compiled and the fact that your inheritance is separate property, I believe we can ensure your wife receives only what she's entitled to under law, which is essentially nothing. The house was purchased before the inheritance, so it's marital property. But given her misconduct, we can argue for you to retain full ownership and for her to receive other assets of equivalent value. She paused. Of course, since there are no other assets of equivalent value that she has any claim to. I understood. Evelyn would leave the marriage with whatever personal belongings she could carry and whatever small balance remained in our joint checking account. Everything else would remain mine. There is one complication, Victoria continued. Your son-in-law's involvement complicates matters, particularly if your daughter decides to pursue a divorce as well. If she divorces him for adultery and seeks punitive damages, and if he has no assets to satisfy any judgment, she might look to her mother as a co-conspirator. Your wife could potentially be held liable for the destruction of your daughter's marriage. The irony was delicious. Evelyn's affair with David could cost her not only her own marriage settlement, but also make her liable for damages to Claire's marriage. I want to pursue every legal avenue available, I said. It will be expensive. Legal fees alone could reach $50,000 or more. That's acceptable. Victoria's smile widened. Then let's get to work. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal activity. Victoria's team worked with military precision, filing papers, gathering evidence, and building an airtight case. Evelyn was served with divorce papers at her office, a public humiliation that her coworkers would gossip about for months. David, meanwhile, had moved out of Claire's house and into a cheap apartment across town. Claire had filed for divorce within days of our family meeting, and David's construction company's salary meant he couldn't afford decent legal representation. He was represented by a young attorney who looked like he was fresh out of law school. The first settlement conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early October. I arrived at Victoria's office an hour early, dressed in my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of financial documents. I wanted to look the part of the successful businessman I had secretly been for years. Evelyn arrived with her attorney, a middle-aged man named Gerald Morris, who specialized in representing wives in contentious divorces. But even Morris looked uncomfortable as Victoria methodically presented our evidence: the phone records, the assisted living facility consultations, and the medical records from the adhesive incident that proved Evelyn and David had been in a compromising position. "Mr. Bennett," Morris said during a break in negotiations, "your client's position is quite harsh. Perhaps we could discuss some form of spousal support, given the length of the marriage." Victoria didn't even look up from her notes. "Your client forfeited any claim to spousal support when she decided to sleep with her son-in-law and plot to have my client declared incompetent. The assisted living consultation was born out of genuine concern." "Documented by whom?" Victoria interrupted. "What medical professional diagnosed Mr. Bennett with cognitive issues? What incidents were reported to justify these concerns?" Morris fell silent. There were no medical reports, no documented incidents, no professional assessments. Evelyn's claims about my mental state had been fabricated to support her plan to remove me from my own life. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "my client has documentation showing that your client and Mr. Stones made inquiries about selling the marital home while my client was supposedly being evaluated for residential care. Please explain to me how that represents genuine concern for his welfare." I hadn't known about the inquiries to real estate agents, but Victoria's investigators had been thorough. Evelyn and David had been pricing the house, presumably to determine how much money they would have to fund their new life together once I was safely locked away. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Walter, please. We were married for 30 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked at this woman who had shared my bed, my home, my life for 3 decades. The woman who had kissed me goodbye on the morning I discovered her betrayal, who had planned my imprisonment while I made her breakfast and worried about her happiness. "It meant everything to me," I said quietly. "That's why what you did is unforgivable. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. Can't we work through this?" "You didn't make a mistake, Evelyn. You made a series of calculated decisions over 14 months. You chose to betray our marriage. You chose to conspire against me. You chose to involve our daughter in your schemes. Those weren't mistakes. They were choices." The final settlement was as brutal as Victoria had promised. Evelyn would receive $7,300 from our joint checking account, her personal belongings and her car. Everything else, the house, my retirement accounts, my investment portfolios, and all of the inheritance remained mine. She would also be responsible for her own legal fees, which had already exceeded $15,000. As we left the courthouse after the final hearing, Evelyn approached me in the parking lot. She looked older than her 58 years, worn down by months of legal battles and the stress of watching her carefully constructed plan crumble. "Walter," she said, "I know you hate me. I know I destroyed everything. But I need you to understand something." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "I did love you for most of our marriage. I really did love you. It's just that, somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like your wife and started feeling like your caretaker. You were so content with your routine, so satisfied with your small life, and I wanted more. You could have talked to me about wanting more. Would you have listened? Really? When was the last time we talked about anything except bills and household maintenance and your aches and pains?" She had a point, though I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of admitting it. Our marriage had become routine, predictable, safe. Maybe too safe. "And David made you feel alive again," I said. Evelyn nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. He made me feel like a woman instead of just a wife. He made me feel desirable and exciting and young. So, you decided to have me committed so you could run away with him. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. We were just going to suggest that you might be happier in a place where you had more social interaction, more activities. We thought if you were settled somewhere nice, David and I could quietly divorce from our spouses and start over. Quietly divorce? I repeated. You were going to destroy Claire's marriage quietly. Evelyn's tears were flowing freely now. We hoped she would understand eventually. We thought she would want us to be happy. The delusion was breathtaking. They had actually convinced themselves that Claire would be grateful to have her marriage destroyed so her mother and husband could be together. Evelyn, I said, my voice surprisingly gentle, did you ever consider that I might have wanted to be happy too? She looked at me with genuine surprise as if the thought had never occurred to her. I walked away without saying goodbye. But Evelyn and David weren't the only ones facing consequences. Claire had been avoiding me since the night of our family meeting. But she couldn't avoid the legal proceedings. As David's wife, she was required to testify about their marriage, their financial situation, and her knowledge of his relationship with her mother. I attended Claire's divorce hearing, not out of malice, but because I needed to understand how deep her involvement in the conspiracy had been. What I learned broke my heart. Claire's attorney presented evidence that David had been emotionally abusive, isolating her from friends and manipulating her into believing that I was becoming dangerous and unreliable. The assisted living consultation hadn't been Claire's idea. David had convinced her that I was showing signs of dementia and that immediate action was necessary to protect everyone. He told me Dad was getting violent, Claire testified, her voice shaking. He said Dad had threatened him during a phone call and that Mom was afraid to be alone in the house. He showed me websites about elder abuse and convinced me that Dad was becoming unpredictable. David had manipulated my daughter into believing I was a threat, using her love for me against me. He had turned her natural concern for her aging father into a weapon to remove me from his path to Evelyn. When Claire finally called me after her divorce was finalized, I almost didn't answer. But something in her voicemail, a brokenness that reminded me of the little girl who used to run to me when she was hurt, made me pick up. Dad, she said, I know you probably never want to see me again, but I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was protecting you. I know, I said. David showed me articles about dementia and elder abuse. He convinced me that you were becoming dangerous, that you might hurt yourself or someone else. He made me believe the assisted living place was the safest option for everyone. Claire, why didn't you talk to me directly about these concerns? A long pause. Because David said that people with dementia often don't recognize their own symptoms. He said that if I confronted you directly, you might become agitated or violent. David had isolated Claire from me as effectively as he had isolated her from her friends. He had created a narrative where direct communication with me was dangerous, where my own daughter couldn't trust my word about my own mental state. Dad, I lost everything. My marriage, my home, my savings. David cleaned out our joint account before I filed for divorce. I don't have anywhere to go. For the first time in months, I felt a stirring of the protective instinct I had always felt for my daughter. Claire had been a victim, too, manipulated and used by David just as I had been used by Evelyn. Claire, I said, would you like to come home? The question surprised both of us. After everything that had happened, after all the betrayals and lies and legal battles, was I really ready to forgive my daughter? I don't deserve that, she whispered. Maybe not, I admitted, but you're still my daughter. And unlike your mother, you were manipulated into your actions rather than choosing them freely. What would happen if I came home? We would have to rebuild trust. We would have to establish new boundaries. And you would have to accept that I'm not the helpless old man you thought I was. I'm beginning to understand that. That evening, Claire moved back into her childhood bedroom with nothing but 2 suitcases and a chastened understanding of how completely she had been deceived. 6 months after the divorces were finalized, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The house was everything my old suburban home wasn't: spacious, modern, and mine alone. Nestled on 15 acres in the Colorado Rockies, 2 hours outside Denver, it represented the life I had always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a hawk or the whisper of wind through the pine trees. I had purchased the property for $800,000 in cash, shocking the real estate agent who had assumed I was just another retiree downsizing from a larger home. The house itself was a custom-built log structure with floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the wilderness inside. I had spent another $200,000 on renovations, creating exactly the sanctuary I wanted for this new chapter of my life. Claire lived here too, in a converted guest cottage on the far side of the property. The physical distance between our living spaces had helped us rebuild our relationship slowly and carefully, without the pressure of forced intimacy. She had a job at a veterinary clinic in the nearest town, a 40-minute drive through mountain roads that she said gave her time to think and decompress. Our relationship was different now. Claire treated me with a respect that had been absent before, and I had learned to see her as an adult who had made mistakes rather than a child who needed protecting. We had dinner together twice a week, and she helped me with property maintenance projects that were too big for one person to handle alone. "Dad," she had said during one of our evening conversations, "I keep thinking about how different things might have been if David hadn't manipulated me, if I had just talked to you directly instead of believing everything he told me." Don't torture yourself with what-ifs, Claire. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. She had been quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire crackling in my stone fireplace. "I've been thinking about going back to school, maybe getting my degree in veterinary science instead of just being a technician." "That's expensive," I had pointed out. "I know. I'd have to take out loans, work part-time while studying. It would take years." I had considered my response carefully. Claire needed to rebuild her life independently, to prove to herself that she could succeed on her own merits. But she was still my daughter. "What if I made you a loan?" I had suggested. "Low interest, reasonable repayment terms. You could focus on your studies without worrying about immediate financial pressure." Her eyes had filled with tears. "Dad, after everything I did, you were manipulated by someone you trusted. That doesn't make you responsible for his choices, and it doesn't mean you should be punished for the rest of your life." Claire was now halfway through her first semester of pre-veterinary studies at Colorado State University, driving down to Fort Collins 3 days a week for classes. She was thriving in ways I had never seen before, freed from David's constant manipulation and rediscovering her own interests and ambitions. Evelyn and David, meanwhile, had discovered that love built on deception rarely survives the harsh light of reality. I received updates about their situation through the legal network that Victoria maintained. David had lost his job at the construction company when word of his affair spread through their tight-knit community. Construction work depends heavily on trust and reputation, and David's actions had made him unemployable in our area. Evelyn had been forced to take a second job to make ends meet, working evenings at a retail store to supplement her insurance office income. The stress of financial pressure combined with the social ostracism they faced in our former neighborhood had put tremendous strain on their relationship. They moved to an apartment complex on the other side of town, Victoria had informed me during one of our periodic updates. 2 bedrooms, $850 a month. David has been picking up day labor when he can find it, but it's inconsistent work. And Evelyn's working 60 hours a week between both jobs. She looks exhausted whenever I see her around town. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I felt no sympathy either. They had chosen their path, and they were living with the consequences of their choices. The most significant consequence, however, was what their affair had done to their relationship with each other. Love that begins with betrayal carries the seeds of distrust, and both Evelyn and David now knew exactly what the other was capable of when unhappiness struck. "David has been seen around town with other women," Victoria had mentioned during our last conversation. "Nothing serious as far as anyone knows, but Evelyn's aware of it. She confronted him publicly outside the grocery store last month. Quite a scene, according to witnesses. The foundation of their relationship had been the excitement of forbidden love, the thrill of secret meetings and stolen moments. Once their relationship became public, once they were forced to deal with mundane problems like rent and groceries and bills, the romance had evaporated quickly. I had run into Evelyn exactly once since the divorce, at the post office in our old town, where I had gone to handle some remaining business. She looked tired and older, her hair showing gray roots she hadn't bothered to touch up, her clothes practical rather than flattering. "Walter," she said, clearly startled to see me. "Evelyn." I nodded politely, treating her like any other acquaintance. "I heard you moved to Colorado." "I did." "And Claire's with you?" "She is." Evelyn stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to proceed. Finally she asked, "Are you happy?" The question surprised me. "Yes, I am," I said. "Are you?" She considered the question seriously before answering. "No. I thought I would be, but no." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you really?" I thought about it. "Yes, I am." "I never wanted you to be miserable, Evelyn. I just wanted you to face the consequences of your choices. And have I?" "That's not for me to judge." She nodded slowly. "I think about what I gave up. About what we had before everything went wrong." "What we had wasn't perfect either," I pointed out. "You said so yourself. We had grown comfortable, maybe too comfortable, but it was real. What David and I had felt real at the time, but it was built on lies and excitement and the thrill of doing something forbidden. Once the excitement was gone," she trailed off, but I understood. Their relationship had been like a drug, providing an emotional high that couldn't be sustained once it became their everyday reality. "Evelyn," I said gently, "you can build a new life. You're 59 years old, not 99. You have time to figure out what really makes you happy." 2 weeks later, Victoria called to tell me that Evelyn and David had broken up. David had moved out of their shared apartment, and Evelyn was living alone for the first time since she was 28 years old. Now, standing in my mountain kitchen 6 months later, I reflected on the complete transformation of my life. The man who had discovered his wife's betrayal at a suburban pool no longer existed. That Walter Bennett had been passive, trusting to a fault, willing to accept whatever scraps of affection and respect his family was willing to offer. This Walter Bennett knew his own worth. This Walter Bennett had boundaries and enforced them. This Walter Bennett had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destructive behavior. I had also learned something unexpected about myself. I was happier alone than I had been in an unhappy marriage. The solitude I had feared after Evelyn left had turned out to be peaceful rather than lonely. I woke up when I wanted to, ate what I wanted to, and spent my days pursuing interests that Evelyn had never shared. I had taken up photography, something I had always been interested in but never had time for during my working years. The mountains provided endless subjects, and I was developing a decent eye for composition and lighting. I had even sold a few prints to a gallery in Denver, not because I needed the money, but because it felt good to have my work valued. I had also begun volunteering at a wildlife rehabilitation center, using my postal service experience with logistics and organization to help them manage their operations more efficiently. The work was satisfying in ways my old job had never been, and it connected me with people who shared my love of nature and conservation. My social life was limited but genuine. I had developed friendships with several neighbors, couples in their 60s and 70s who had also moved to the mountains for retirement. We gathered for dinner parties and hiking trips, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. One of my neighbors, a widow named Dorothy, whose husband had died 3 years earlier, had become a particularly close friend. We shared similar interests in photography and wildlife, and she had been instrumental in getting me involved with the rehabilitation center. Our relationship was platonic but comfortable, and I appreciated having a female perspective on the changes in my life. "You seem at peace," Dorothy had observed during one of our photography walks through the national forest. "I am," I had realized with some surprise. "For the first time in years, I am exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, with no one demanding that I be someone different." "That's a rare gift," she had said. "Most people never figure out how to be content with themselves." She was right. The pursuit of security and routine that had driven so much of my adult life had given way to a simpler appreciation of beauty, solitude, and authentic relationships. I had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life without worrying about expenses. But more importantly, I had enough self-respect to never again accept treatment that diminished my dignity. The legal proceedings were finally complete. Evelyn's attempts to claim a portion of my inheritance had failed, and David's efforts to gain any financial settlement from Claire's divorce had been unsuccessful. Both of them were facing the reality of rebuilding their lives from scratch, in their late 50s and early 30s respectively. Claire's progress continued to amaze me. Her grades were excellent, her confidence was growing, and she was developing friendships with classmates who shared her passion for animal care. She had also begun dating a fellow pre-vet student, a relationship that seemed healthy and balanced in ways her marriage to David had never been. "Dad," she had said during our most recent dinner together, "I want you to know that I understand now what you did for me. Not just financially but emotionally. You could have cut me off completely after what I was part of, and you would have been justified. You're my daughter, Claire. That doesn't change because you made mistakes. But you didn't just forgive me blindly. You made me prove that I had learned from those mistakes. You made me rebuild my life independently before you offered to help. That took wisdom I didn't appreciate at the time." I felt a deep satisfaction hearing those words, not because I needed praise, but because it meant Claire truly understood the difference between enabling and supporting, between helping someone avoid consequences and helping them learn from consequences. As I watched the sunrise complete its transformation of the mountain landscape, I felt grateful for the painful journey that had brought me to this place. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of my real life, the life I was meant to live once I stopped accepting less than I deserved. The old Walter Bennett would have endured Evelyn's affair in silence, would have accepted the narrative that he was becoming incompetent, would have allowed himself to be placed in assisted living while his family destroyed itself with greed and selfishness. This Walter Bennett had fought back. He had demanded respect, had refused to be a victim of other people's choices, and in standing up for himself, he had not only reclaimed his own dignity but had also given his daughter the opportunity to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside onto my deck, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and an eagle circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. This was freedom. This was peace. This was the life I had earned by refusing to accept anything less than the truth, no matter how much that truth had cost me. For the first time in 30 years, I was exactly where I belonged.